Welcome to the Get Over Yourself podcast. This is author and athlete Brad Kearns discovering ways to be healthy, fit, and happy in hectic, high-stress modern life. So let's slow down and take a deep breath, take a cold plunge, and expertly balance that competitive intensity with an appreciation of the journey. That's the theme of the show. Here we go. The Get Over Yourself podcast is brought to you by Almost Heaven, beautiful compact home use sauna kits, ancestral supplements, grass-fed organ meats in a capsule, DNA Fit, genetic testing for custom diet and exercise recommendations, Integro Health, high-potency liquid probiotic called Flourish, Organifi, organic powdered superfoods, delicious green, gold, and red powders, Wild Idea Buffalo, sustainable, grass-fed, beyond organic, and check out the bradkearns.com/shop page. That's my personal selection of favorite products for health, fitness, and peak performance. And here we go with the show.
It's amazing what you can get away with when you're 18, 19, 20, 21.
Usain Bolt, chicken McNuggets. And world records fueled by chicken McNuggets.
I think absolutely different approaches can work, right? And it sounds like people are losing weight very successfully, doing paleo, keto. As far as everything that I've read, I've yet to see a kind of meat-centric, meat-focused eating plan that's been able to actually reverse heart disease. Whereas the Engine 2 burgers, on the other hand, my man, the Engine 2 plant-based burgers, we're talking first ingredient is brown rice, then we've got black beans, then we've got rolled oats, then we've got, caramelized onions, roasted red bell peppers, and herbs and spices. And we have 4 different SKUs, varieties, and each one of them is basically, it's a different bean. The common denominator is the brown rice and the oats, and then different herbs, spices, and beans.
Let's talk about ancestral supplements. If you're into ancestral health, primal paleo, keto, you know the importance of consuming these unique agents contained in bone marrow, in the nose-to-tail organ meats, liver, kidney, all that stuff, the great bone broth benefits. Well, how's it going? For me, since years ago when Dr. Kate Shanahan asserted the importance of these wonderful nutritional benefits that you can't get elsewhere, not too good. I don't know how to cook a liver or a kidney, but now your problems are solved forever when you go to ancestralsupplements.com, a wonderful company filled with people who are living the dream, walking their talk, and bottling up the purest, cleanest sources of grass-fed organ meats, kidney, liver, bone marrow, all in these wonderful capsules. I dump them in my smoothie every day. I'm healthy. I don't have to worry. It's an incredible dietary boost. And this is so different from swallowing a bunch of those synthetic vitamins in those giant bottles from the big box stores. Highly questionable health practice. This stuff is the real deal. Grass-fed organ meats, pure as can be. Ancestralsupplements.com. Get ready for the Ripper. Rip Esselstyn. Old friend of mine for 30 years. Compadre on the professional triathlon circuit. We had such a great time traveling around together, and I was just drawn to Rip every time I could, every time we joined each other on the circuit, and we'd visit and talk for hours, linger in the dining hall or the restaurant or the hotel room, and we were doing this incredibly intense competitive experience, racing triathlons, but he had such a positive light about him, so enthusiastic all the time, always full of energy, and never a complaint or a harsh word. He just enjoyed life, enjoyed the experience, and wouldn't you know it, he went on after he retired from racing to a very interesting high-profile career as an advocate for whole food, plant-based eating and lifestyle. Can you believe I have a plant dude on my show? I'm open-minded. I like to think critically and have my beliefs challenged sometimes, and listening to an alternative point of view is a wonderful growth experience. maybe that's true in politics too, as long as you keep it clean and civil and polite. And Rip and I did a great job doing that, of course, because we love each other, man. And he respects what I'm doing and what Sisson's doing and the whole primal paleo keto scene. He has to because he lives in Austin, Texas. But we have some material differences of opinion that will come out in this show, and you can listen and assess and absorb the message and see what you think. You know what it's coming down to, for me anyway, is that we have to find common ground on these things. Rather than argue and take the conversation sideways, we have to realize that we're all after the same thing. We want to live a healthy, long, happy life. And boy, there's science on any side of the coin you wish to explore to support your views and your beliefs. But if we can find this common ground and realize that your first step to health is to get rid of all the shit in your diet, we all agree on that. We can agree that the feedlot animals and the way that animals are processed in conventional methods is extremely unhealthy, not only for the human, the end product, but also to the environment. So if you're listening to a plant-based advocate go on and on about the nasty feedlots and the dirty pig farms, of course we can nod our heads in agreement. And then we have that great divergence where Rip is going to tell you how nasty and terrible meat and eggs are for you and how they'll clog your pipes and kill you, and then make his argument for the plant-based side. But again, if we go back to square one and realize that if we get that junk food out of our diet, you're probably going to be looking pretty good, especially if you move and get outdoors and exercise and get enough sleep. And oh my gosh, Rip with his positive attitude and his championing the cause of living healthy and inspiring and motivating so many people, even if we have a slightly different approach or a significantly different approach, if you want to call it that. It's worth listening to, and you will enjoy this show. So here we go. Wind up this man, start him up, and he will light it up for the length of the show. No breaks. Rippa. Wait till you hear the part about the feel near the end. This amazing athletic insight that I never forgot. It's crazy, it's wacky, but it's going to rock your world. Rip Esselstyn. Here we are in Austin, Texas. We've been talking about doing this for a while. Now you got your own podcast. We're going to rock this thing, man. And listeners, you might not know this, Rip, but I promise my listeners, like, we record the stuff that happens after the button stopped and get real and get deep into it. And I broke my promise because we were talking about some intimate personal matters and all kinds of fun stuff before we hit record. Now we're going to fire this puppy up.
Let's do this, Brad.
First, plug your podcast, man.
Well, just launched the Plant Strong podcast. God, just a couple of weeks ago, and it's going to be different than most kind of start stop podcasts. We're kind of telling it's an episodic narrative, and what we've done is in season 1, I've taken this Bronx firefighter. His name is Joe Inga, and in January he sent me this really heartfelt email, and he made himself very vulnerable, and he basically said that he was like 34 years old, about 70 pounds overweight, high cholesterol, high LDL, and 2 young kids. His partner fell off a burning roof 35 feet, got paralyzed, and he was like, he just came to this epiphany that I need to start taking care of myself. And he watched Forks Over Knives about 7 years ago. And every year, he says at his firefighter annual physical, he gets flagged for high triglycerides, high cholesterol, high LDL. And then he does the whole food plant-based thing, and his numbers get great. And he says, but he just has a hard time making it stick.
Every year.
Right.
So
right
he's, before his physical, he goes into his...
No, it's after he gets flagged for all these things.
Right.
So he said, Rip, I've been trying for like 6 years to make this thing stick, and I finally decided I needed to reach out for help. So that's what this email is about. And
is
so
it a stranger, he just emailed you?
Yes, I get.
Don't you get 700 emails a day? I mean,
I get a fair amount, but you know, when they come from firefighters,
right.
and they're really heartfelt and personal like that, you know, I read them and I respond. So I was going to New York anyway to basically have some other people on as guests on the podcast, and this is my first foray into this. And he was like the second or third person I had on, And is immediately after I interviewed him for like an hour and 20, me and the other people I was in the room with were like, oh my God, like this guy needs to be the through line throughout every episode. And so right now what we're thinking is that the first season will be 26 episodes. And every episode we are kind of tackling another hurdle that Joe is facing. And I'm bringing in I'm marshaling together my superhero, plant strong, doctors, friends, leaders, iconic heroes, TV producers like J.D. Roth. And together we're not only helping Joe kind of figure it out and get to a place where he can become the plant strong man he wants to be, but we're also, basically talking to every Joe and every Jane that's out there that also is interested in.
Yeah, I like how his name's Joe. Joe firefighter. Joe. It just happened. Joe everyman. That's great. Right.
Joe football. Joe
businessman.
Yeah. So it's really cool. And so the podcast is as all things in life, you don't know necessarily where you're going to go with something, but by not letting the fear overcome you and just taking that first step, it's amazing how, the universe unfolds and the dots start to connect. And so now all of a sudden the podcast I'm super excited about it. Going into it, I was like, oh, there's so many podcasts out there. And what can I bring to the table that hasn't already been done and is, unique and different. And now I feel like we've actually been able to put together something that's of great value and I can get really excited about. So, the first 2 episodes are already out there. The first was my father, who was
Caldwell Esselstyn.
Caldwell B. Esselstyn Jr., right?
The Cleveland Clinic.
The famed Cleveland Clinic. And we're talking about the number one killer of firefighters in the line of duty, which is heart disease, heart attacks.
Well, that's not in the line of duty. That's back at the ranch eating that crappy food or something.
Well,
back at the station house is where those heart attacks come.
And I like to say that firefighters eat the standard American diet on steroids. So everything is like, triple fried and, et cetera, et cetera.
And Ripper, is it so that the firefighting population has a lower life expectancy because of their hazards at work, like breathing the chemicals? I don't know if that's...
You know what? I'm sure that's probably the case. I don't know the exact number. Like I've heard that your average NFL football player has a life expectancy of 56.
Yeah.
And then, I've heard that doctors, believe it or not, doctors have a very, very low life expectancy of like 59.
Wow.
Most doctors aren't taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
But as far as firefighters, I don't know the exact age, but I'm sure it's pretty low. I know way too many guys that I've either worked with or I've known about with Austin Fire Department, and they retire, and the next thing you know, you hear that they died of a heart attack 6 months into retirement.
Yeah.
They didn't even get to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, and then the second episode is okay, you've bought into this, you believe in the science, now what, right? I'm all in, now what do I do? And it's like, all right, how do you outfit your kitchen? What are some, starter meals, some starter dishes? So for that, I bring in my mother, who's been the kind of the creative genius behind, initiating the Esselstyn family's whole food plant-based kind of journey back in 1984.
1984?
Yeah.
Is when, you turned a corner? Was this because your dad doing some work at Cleveland Clinic and finding that diet intervention is reversing heart disease?
No, it's exactly right. So in 1984 is when he decided that, so his specialty was breast cancer, thyroid, and the parathyroid. And, at one point he had done more thyroid and parathyroid operations than any doctor in the United States. But with breast cancer, he was like determined to figure out how women could try and put an end to it. And when he kind of scoured the cultures around the planet that didn't have breast cancer or very low incidences of breast cancer, like 1/50th of what we had in the United States, he discovered that the one common denominator was they were eating a predominantly plant-based diet. And so he figured in his lifetime he'd have a hard time proving that you could stop, halt, reverse, breast cancer, prostate cancer, some of these, these major cancers. but he was kind of convinced because of his studies and all the epidemiological studies that he looked at, that he could do it with heart disease, right? And by having people eat to save their hearts, they could also save their breasts and their prostates and, you know, their pancreas and all these other organs. So he asked the cardiology department at the Cleveland Clinic to send him their patients that were so bad off, they were considered the walking dead. Most of them were men, and they had what's considered end-stage heart disease, which means they were given less than a year to live. They'd been turned down for another bypass, another stent, angioplasty, you know, and it basically...
Not you again. Go away.
No,
we already gave you 3. Get out of here.
Well, no, you say that, but it's funny. I mean, my dad has actually counseled patients that have had 47 stents. It's surgical whack-a-mole, right? And they're never addressing the root causation of what's going on, you know. And so he was, over the course of a year and a half in 1984, the cardiology department sent him 21 of these walking dead patients, and he took these people, took them under his arm, and he was damned if these guys were not going to be compliant. And he said, listen, this is the story. I have no idea if it's going to work or not, but to ensure that you're compliant, I want you to come in. You're going to see me, not a nurse practitioner, not, you know, anybody else. You're going to see me every other Monday. We're going to go over every morsel you're eating. I want you to keep a food diary. And then we're also going to test your blood. We're going to do your blood pressure. We're going to weigh you in. And he did that for 5 years with every one of these patients, right? Do you know how motivated you're going to be when you've got a coach like that you got to be responsible and be accountable for every 2 weeks? He's going to look at every morsel you eat, and then to make sure that you're compliant, right? We're going to also check your blood levels. I mean, total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, you know, the whole bit, right? Fasting glucose. And after 5 years, he felt so good about the direction they were heading in that he moved it back to once a month for the next 5 years.
These are the same guys?
Same people.
Oh, okay, the same
and they're
people.
still alive.
So they're still alive.
They're still alive.
Yeah.
And so that's like, yeah. And, you know, their total cholesterol levels are, you know, through the moon, 300, 280s. And now almost every one of them comes down to where their average total cholesterol was under 150. Their average LDL was under 80. You know, their triglycerides were well under 150. Just like pristine, beautiful numbers. And a few of these patients also were on low doses of statins. But there were several also that were not on any statins. And when my father started this in 1984, there were no statins that were out there, right? But at some point when they introduced them, I think his analogy was, you know, eating whole food plant-based is your belt, and then just to ensure, I'm going to give them a little low dose of statins, just like the suspenders. But yeah, and so 15 years, 20 years, and now they're starting to die, and the cool thing is they're not dying of heart disease, they're not dying of major cancer, they're dying of other things related to old age in their 90s plus, right? So, and one of his you'll appreciate this, one of his first initial round of patients was Merlin Murphy of Murphy's Oil Soaps, right? One of my first main sponsors of me as a triathlete back, you know, in 1988, 89, 1990. And of course, you know, I got that in because of my father and his relationship with Merlin Murphy. And they ended up selling Murphy Oil Soap to Colgate Palmolive. I think it was in like 1993 or 4 for like 120 million, right? And then Colgate Palmolive, as part of the transition, they kept up their sponsorship of me for like another 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that time frame coincides with you emerging from an all-American swimming career at UT, right here in town in Austin, going on to the pro circuit and making a go out of it. So I guess were you instant buy-in to this dietary stuff that probably wasn't happening at UT Mess Hall, right? And then
No.
you're checking back in hometown Cleveland, now you got to be a peak performing athlete. That's your job every day for the next decade plus.
Yeah.
So did you go right into this nutritious, colorful, plant-based diet?
So I was at UT on a swimming scholarship from 1982 to 1986. While I was there, I was also eating at the athletic dining room. The athletes dining hall, and it wasn't just swimmers. It was the football players, it was the basketball players, it was the baseball team, it was the tennis team, the golf team. A lot of these scholarship athletes, and it was truly an abomination. I mean, it was steak, fried steak, chicken breast. I should say it's an abomination for somebody that now is whole food plant-based. And it was full fat, it was bacon, it was eggs, it was full fat dairy products. I mean, the only salads they had were little romaine salads. If there was any vegetables, they were swimming in butter and oil, and lard. So, looking back, it was not the optimal diet to fuel these athletes, but it's amazing what you can get away with when you're 18, 19, 20, 21.
Yeah, Usain Bolt, chicken McNuggets.
And
world records fueled by chicken McNuggets.
Yeah. Is that Michael Phelps?
Usain Bolt.
Oh, Usain Bolt.
Yeah. And then Phelps' famous story in USA Today with his 12,000 calorie breakfast of all the refined carbohydrates. But I think burning it off gives you some leeway.
Well, I always heard that Usain Bolt, what fueled his, his speed, according to his father, was the Jamaican sweet potato that he was a big fan of.
That's probably his lifetime of reared on that island natural food. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Then he goes and sees the chicken McNuggets. He goes crazy in the Olympic Village. Like, this stuff's great.
All the hyper amounts of salt, sugar, fat. He couldn't help himself.
Sugar and fat together is the thing that hijacks the pleasure center in the brain, right? Where everything that's paired in, like the Twinkie and the Ding Dong and the junk food ice cream, is that assault to the senses of sugar and fat, because we're not genetically adapted to that. We didn't have that in nature, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good point. And David Kessler, who was the former head of the Food and Drug Administration, wrote a book called The End of Overeating. And in it, he talks about how these food manufacturers, they, especially, the packaged, the boxed, and the canned foods, they put salt on top of sugar, on top of fat, and then they put more salt on top of sugar, on top of fat, and then they have the unmitigated audacity to put more salt on top of sugar, on top of fat. So you have this complete unnatural amount of salt, sugar, and fat that we were never supposed to be ingesting. And you're right. I mean, you get these hyper concentrated amounts of these substances, and they go off like a pinball machine in your brain, because we have receptors for them, just like we do for heroin and nicotine and all these other things. And before you know it, you've got this low level addiction, right? These cravings for salt, sugar, and fat. I had a guy that I had on the podcast, hasn't come out yet, who got up to 420 pounds. And I said, how do you get up to 420 pounds?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of discipline, devotion, daily practice.
And he was telling me about his nightly run to the Bell, right? The Taco Bell. And he said, even though at the time he was working
for the border,
even though he was working at a Mexican restaurant, it just didn't do it. And so he had to go to Taco Bell. He would spend $20 and he'd get some insane, 4,000 calories worth of, 7-layer burritos and chimichangas and whatever you get there. And he said he did that for 10, 15 years. And gradually he's also doing pizzas. He's doing, Burger King, the whole thing. But what is it that's driving people there? It's the unnatural amounts of salt, sugar, and fat. And as David Kessler says, you got to pull yourself away from that stuff. And then you got to come back to a reality that's not so hyper, inflated, and then kind of reclaim your lost palate that's been hijacked by these food manufacturers. And, if you're eating out at restaurants, you got to reclaim it. And in my books, I talk about, different levels of salt, sugar, and fat that we want to hit on a daily basis. We don't want to go over 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. And that's really hard to do if you don't know how to read a food label. We don't want to go over 2 to 4 added teaspoons of sugar. And again, if you don't know how to read a label, sugar is the third, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth, and the 15th ingredient in that product. And if you don't know how to read a label, you're eating foods that are 50 to 70% fat, right? And I can point to, in the plant-based world, the hottest burger going right now is the Beyond Meat burger, right? It's selling better than almost, than red meat burgers. And it's 70% fat. It's got 3 oils in the first 6 ingredients.
That's what it's called?
The Beyond Meat burger.
And
Beyond
it's
Meat.
a packaged product that's mass produced?
Yes.
Mass distributed?
Yes. It's insane. And
What's the main ingredient?
Well, so, the main ingredient, I'm friends with the CEO, Ethan Brown. I mean, they've done an amazing job at kind of recreating a meat tasting product, the look, the feel, the smell, the way it cooks on the grill. It is like insane how it mimics it. But the first ingredient is pea protein isolates. Then you got safflower oil. Then you have sunflower oil.
Just a fake burger.
then
All right.
Then you have maltodextrin, big fancy word for sugar, right? And then we got coconut oil, which
some people
adore. My father and myself and a bunch of other people were not a fan of the coconut. And then there's a lot of salt. So I mean, yeah, it's but who's to say if I'd rather people have that than a meat burger, but I don't know how healthy it is. I mean, I do know it's not very healthy. Yeah. Whereas the Engine 2 burgers, on the other hand, my man, the Engine 2 plant-based burgers, we're talking first ingredient is brown rice. Then we've got black beans. Then we've got rolled oats. Then we've got, caramelized onions, roasted red bell peppers, and herbs and spices. And we have 4 different SKUs, varieties, and each one of them is basically, it's a different bean. The kind of the common denominator is the brown rice and the oats, and then different herbs, spices, and beans. But we have a pinto habanero, we have an Italian fennel, we have a black bean poblano, and a white bean and Tuscan kale. Right? Love it.
Going to town.
Yeah. And we have, and instead of having 670 milligrams of sodium per burger, we've got anywhere on the low end, we've got our white bean and Tuscan kale that's got 15 milligrams. And the high end, we have our black bean poblano that's got 100 milligrams. So
here we are, Ripper, in 2019. We've been hanging since the early days of our triathlon careers in the late 80s. So what's that, 25 years or something we've known each other. And
I used to love rooming with you at triathlons.
We had good times.
You were between you and Jimmy Bricatello, I was like, I loved either one of you.
I remember when we went to Embrun in the Alps in France and we did some river rafting. And I remember like stacking 3 of the rafts on top of each other and then everyone climbing in the top one and hitting tree branches and wild times.
It was you, me, McNaughton, was maybe Wes Hobson, maybe Glenn Mangum. I can't remember everybody.
So, and you and I, we kind of, pursued this health quest from that point forward, right? Athletes is, you're focused on performing in a race and beating your time and improving your swim or improving your run. And we're talking about the pedaling circles and all that stuff. And then we had to go get real life and real jobs. So I guess it'd be good to talk about, I like talking to you about our common ground and our unique, we have this personality and this quest to help other people and natural coaching instincts and wanting to draw them into, life change from a positive energy perspective rather than something that's silly and unsustainable. But we have these kind of disparate routes, I guess you would say, because I've been in this primal paleo scene and I don't know what my listenership is. It's not the paleo podcast. So maybe some of them have come to interest from this ancestral living perspective. The Paleo FX is on down the street. I noticed you're not on the agenda.
I am not, but I guess Dr. Joel Kahn is. he's a cardiologist from Detroit. Oh. He was on the Joe Rogan Experience, and
So what's funny, like big picture, especially for both of us, trying to work our way through this and make a career effort, is we have passionate voices on either side. There seems to be some difference of opinion on material matters, And then there seems to be a lot of common ground. But I get the complaint from people in my world, like, who am I supposed to believe? You know, you're looking me in the eye saying, don't eat a high-fat diet, and then we go and listen to a sold-out presentation down the street where the guy's saying the opposite, essentially. Personal experimentation, I'm always big on that, rather than just getting into intellectual debate on a podcast show. But beyond that, what do you think about in this journey that you've had, and your father especially too? Like, we know it's worked. We know the Dr. Esselstyn's work is just like Pritikin and Dean Ornish and all this great success. And then we go on Mark's Daily Apple, and there's 2,000 success stories of dudes that were 405 down to 179. I got an email the other day. Guy sent me the picture. He's smiling. He's a real human. Larry Diamond here in town, same thing. He was double his weight. I talked to a dude last night. He showed me his picture. We took a selfie of him standing there, Joseph, then his picture when he was double his weight a year ago, and then back to reality. So can different approaches work? What do you got, man?
I think absolutely different approaches can work, right? And it sounds like people are losing weight very successfully, doing paleo, keto. As far as, you know, everything that I've read, I've yet to see a kind of meat-centric, meat-focused eating plan that's been able to actually reverse heart disease.
You heard about this carnivore movement now? This underground carnivore thing?
Yeah, all they eat is meat, right?
Yeah, it's animal. All they eat is eggs, fish, meat. That's it. No plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to do a carnivore podcast, and we'll have the mind filled with everything. But it's very interesting stuff to see how much more disparate can you get. And then there's people walking around healthy on both camps.
Well, yeah, but I think I would say, you know, what's our definition of healthy? Is healthy somebody that, you know, has gone from 420 to 175, or is healthy somebody that's gone from 420 to 175 and, you know, their internal biochemistry shows that all their numbers are great. They're not insulin resistant. They're insulin sensitive. You know, they don't have the, you know, biomarkers for, you know, whatever, cancer, etc.
Yeah, inflammatory biomarkers.
Yeah,
all that. I mean,
CRP, all that
same
stuff.
story down the street. These guys are saying, cut out carbs, refined carbs. I mean, we agree on that shit. It's like, if you go away from Taco Bell and mass produce shit food with a bunch of stuff on the label, we're going to be big winners. And then do we have to worry further? If my blood work looks good and I'm sitting here with you and you're looking over my numbers and I'm looking over yours and we're fist bumping, we still get erections every morning over 50. We're tracking all our important data. Is that the end of the story? Are you worried about 30 years down the line? Are you worried about my health because I'm eating a shit ton of meat and also plant-based? My plate's got a lot of plants on it, but I'm throwing down the other stuff, man, because it's primal paleo time.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a fan of meat, you know, and you know that. I'm not a fan of meat for a myriad of reasons, right? I mean, you take a hard look at a piece of meat versus whole, like, let's just say whole grains or beans or, you know, fruits and vegetables. And I think that it's pretty clear that what does meat have? It's got I'm going to call it a weak type of protein that is too high in the sulfuric containing amino acids, and it does a real number on our body. We talked about inflammation. It actually promotes inflammation, specifically in our arteries. It raises cholesterol levels. Animal protein, it's harsh on our kidneys and our liver. I mean, anybody that's got any kind of kidney issues going on, typically the doctor will tell you, cut back on your protein, you know, go on a low protein diet. And most Americans are just so gaga goo goo for protein. And I tell people, listen, the last thing you need to worry about is protein and getting enough protein. It's there in every plant you're eating. And then, you know, it also, Walter Willett, the head of public health at Harvard University, has gone on record to say that, you know, really the problem with animal proteins is it revs up tumor and cancer cells because it is so it's almost too complete with the sulfuric containing amino acids. And I tell people the beautiful thing about plants is that all proteins originate from plants. It's the mother source of protein. So, there's basically 20 amino acids. Of those 29 are called essential, meaning that we have to get them from our food. We can't synthesize them on our own. And those 9 essential amino acids originate from plants. And you will hear people from Kingdom Come say that the problem with plants is A, you can't get enough protein from plants, and B, plant-based proteins aren't complete. And that's complete and utter bunk. Whether it's a strawberry, a black bean, whether it is a farro, brown rice, baked potatoes, they contain all 9 of the essential amino acids. And they're not pernicious. They're not going to be insidiously destructive like your animal-based proteins. And to me, I don't care if it's red meat, chicken, fish, eggs, all those protein sources are insidiously destructive. The problem with
so we're going to come back and say, Rip, what about a grass-fed steak naturally raised on the open range, or the buffalo that sponsors the show that you're on, right? And the argument is this is such a healthy, nutritious animal. I think we all agree these CAFO animals, the feedlot animals, are disgustingly raised, and there's a lot of chemicals, hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and we want to stay away from that. That's Taco Bell and McDonald's and all that. But are you going to make any kind of concession to someone who's picking the most cleanly pastured eggs?
I'm not. I'm going to say
Rip is saying no.
I'm going to say it would be like saying that, hey, come on, man, these cigarettes that I'm smoking here, these are organic. These are organic, all natural cigarettes. And so with that animal protein, what else are you getting with that grass-fed, pasteurized, meat? Well, you're also getting cholesterol, and there's a lot of debate about that, but there is no reason for us as human beings to take in an extemporaneous source of cholesterol. Our livers produce all we need naturally. Mm-hmm. We don't need to be getting, and red meat and chicken and fish roughly have all the same amount. It's 70 milligrams per 3 ounces. And so you can't get away from cholesterol. You can't get away from I'm just going to call it the destructive animal protein, and you can't get away from the saturated fat. Now the grass-fed may have less saturated fat than another one, but your average piece of red meat, fat-wise, is 40% saturated fat. Your leanest piece of white skinless chicken breast is 30% saturated fat, and then when it comes to fish, your average wild-caught piece of salmon is about 20% saturated fat. And there's a lot of debate especially now, about saturated fat. Is saturated fat good? Is it bad? But from my camp, from where I see, my view is that the predominance of the scientific literature actually shows that saturated fat clogs arteries, saturated fat promotes tumor and cancer cells, saturated fat promotes insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And saturated fat, it's not an essential fat. We do not need saturated fat. The only fats that we need are the polyunsaturated 3s and 6s. And they're called essential because, again, like the 9 essential amino acids that I was talking about earlier with protein, these are the only ones that our bodies can't synthesize on their own. We have to get them from food. And really, one of the greatest sources for omega-3s and 6s are plants. Your green leafies, your walnuts, your chia seeds, your hemp seeds, your fruits and vegetables.
Well,
so yeah.
So going back to your point about the protein, which I believe most people are in complete agreement on, no matter where they come from in the other details. It's not hard to get enough protein. Yeah. And the main danger is excessive protein, which can overstimulate the growth factors. So we're kind of conveying the same message. And then with the fat intake, could this saturated fat be doing bad things, and cholesterol be doing bad things because you got too much nasty ass sugar in your diet? That's kind of the comeback. Like saturated fat is, Gary Taub says, not B.rad or Rip, but Gary Taub says no study has ever shown saturated fat to be harmful in and of itself to consume by the human. The cell membrane is made of saturated fat, etc. That's his stance. He's done a lot of research, right? We can respect that. Now, how come people are saying don't eat it? Could it be from nasty ass sugar baseline diet?
Yeah, but no, I'm not buying that.
You're not buying Gary's. You're not buying the starting point of the.
No, I'm not buying. So here's the thing about saturated fat. Saturated fat predominantly only lives in animal products and animal byproducts.
Or coconut oil, let's say. A few things.
There's some in nuts and seeds and coconuts, but by and large, there's no saturated fat in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans.
Yeah.
So if the keto paleo movement was to agree that, oh yeah, you know what, saturated fat it's not necessarily, we don't need it, especially the MCTs, the medium chain triglycerides that are more readily absorbed by our bodies, that which represent 50% of the saturated fat in coconut oil. The other 50% is the exact same amount of, or is the same type of saturated fat you're going to find in bacon.
Yeah.
But their whole argument would be dead in the water, because, you can't get away from saturated fat when you're eating animal products and animal byproducts. The number one source of saturated fat in the American diet is cheese, right? We're putting cheese in and on and through and over everything these days. 100 years ago, we were eating about 5 pounds of cheese per person per year. Today, it's right around 135 pounds of cheese per person, right, per year. And I'm not eating any. So that means somebody out there is eating 270, right?
That's like the sugar stat too. We eat around our body weight in sugar every year.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about 30 added teaspoons of sugar a day that most people are consuming. And, one Coke is about 10. But I don't think, listen, sugar is empty calories. It's just bullshit, right? It's like, we don't need to be consuming it, but I don't know if I'm going to say that sugar is like the culprit. I think they're trying to say that it's a distraction. It's kind of a red herring of sorts. I think if you were to look at, I think if you look at the latest figures from the USDA, about 55% of America's caloric consumption is coming from processed and refined foods.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I think both would agree that those are, not healthy.
Especially the bad oils. The polyunsaturated vegetable oils are known to be direct association with cancer and damage at the DNA level immediately upon ingestion.
And you and I,
you don't like any.
We're not. So
it's fat.
We're not.
Right.
Not. I'm not going to say because it's fat.
Oh.
We're not a fan of any oil because it's 100% fat, and it is. There goes a truck right by the Engine 2 headquarters. But because it is deprived of any kind of nutritional integrity, you and I have had this conversation when I was at your house, but it's a black hole of nothingness. So for an example, let me use olive oil that is so insanely popular, and people are like, they feel like they have to do, their tablespoon or two of olive oil to do the Mediterranean thing, to be heart healthy. And the Mediterranean diet actually was based on the island of Crete in the 1950s. It was very, very ravaged by war. It was very poor. And it was mostly fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans. It was a very peasant-style diet, limited amounts of fish. But our takeaway from the Mediterranean diet is, Greek yogurt, red wine, olive oil.
Pick and choose, baby.
Yeah, and it was really none of the health promoting substances that are in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans. So I'm trying to think where was I going with this? We were talking about the truck through
the saturated fat
thing.
Oh no, I said what about?
Oh no, oil. No, it was the oil. It was the oil.
Sugar, oil, fat, salt. Let's make the title of this podcast Sugar, Fat, Salt. The cookbook, Fat, Salt, Heat, something. The 4 elements of cooking.
Yeah.
Cooking up with Ripper.
I know exactly
Texas barbecue with Ripper.
So we were talking about oil, and the reason why. So olive oil. It is the triumph, Brad, of marketing over science. Just like I will tell you, all milk products, right? triumph of marketing over science, the milk mustache for calcium, for strong bones, for, all these vital nutrients. I'm going to come back to the oil, but we're the only mammals on the planet that drink another mammal's secretions. It is so wrong, and we become so habitualized over the, however many 50, 75 years that we don't think there's anything wrong with it. And yet it is a cocktail of growth hormones, of estrogens, of cholesterol, of saturated fat, of problematic animal protein. It is vacant of fiber, of phytonutrients, of, antioxidants for the most part. Healthy carbohydrates. What is it? 70% of the planet is lactose intolerant, right? And we're trying to force feed these kids at school, this milk. But so olive oil, it takes 32 olives that you have to squeeze to get 1 tablespoon of olive oil. That's the yield, right? Whew. So I would much rather you eat 6 or 7 olives, right? Yeah. And now you're getting all the protein, the carbs, you're getting the fat. You're also getting all the micronutrients. So you're getting the fiber, the water, the phytonutrients, the antioxidants, the vitamins, and the minerals.
Same with juice, man. Same with juicing.
We're not a fan of juicing either, my man.
Are you digging this guy, listeners? I mean, so far it doesn't sound like he's going to be at the conference. Still.
No, the Paleo FX is not on my list this weekend.
This is why I love Ripper. I mean, there's so much common ground. Remember when we went shopping at the Sacramento Natural Foods Co-op? We had our little basket.
We did.
There was only a couple separations to happen at the end of the shopping journey. Ripper, I'm not going to go with that that giant thing of peaches in the middle of winter, because paleo people are not supposed to do that. But these are the things that we need to bring out. Is like I like that quote. Maybe that's another highlight quote. It's a triumph of marketing over science.
Yeah,
and we got to look deeply at some of this stuff, how it got in front of our face. How about dark chocolate? Is that a triumph of taste?
So dark chocolate that's over 70%. I will have a nibble every now and then. Absolutely.
You have that much self-control? Is that what you're saying?
I just usually don't have it around the house, right? So that way, if it's in the house, it's in the mouth. But so I use a little self-control there.
Right on. You're not kidding either. I mean, that's like before we turned the recording on. Yeah. We said, look, neither of us are PhD level researching food nutrition people, right? But we're motivators, and we like to inspire and educate and figure out how to live a healthy life.
Well, and I think we also we walk the talk, right?
That too.
And we
walk that talk,
and we live the life. And
we're gonna kick those Aussie asses tomorrow in the triathlon. Watch out! Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And but I want to, Brad, I want to come back to kind of eating plant strong. And this is the thing.
I'm also putting that motivational element in there so people can listen to your voice and your passion. Yeah. And that's the part that's special. Yeah.
Okay. But I try and frame it up now when I'm talking like to kids and people. We were raised thinking that red meat was a strong food and a great source of protein. We were raised thinking that dairy products were a strong food and great sources of calcium and vital nutrients. We were raised thinking that the egg was the perfect food and the perfect source of protein. We were raised thinking that some of these oils were heart healthy and brain healthy and stuff. And I think what we've discovered now is that the true strong foods are not the red meat, the oils, the full fat dairy, and all of these things. These are more they're weak, problematic foods on several levels, and we can get into that, or we don't have to get into it. But what I love about the plant-based foods is that they are the true strong superheroes. So you've got, and if you don't mind, if you'll indulge me, Brad, I'd like to talk about what you get with whole plant-based foods when it comes to macro and micronutrients. And this will take like 5 minutes. Okay?
Here he goes.
All right. So you're getting, we've been talking about protein. You're getting a very, very smart, intelligent, strong source of protein where proteins are created, right? And so it's not coming with any riffraff. It's not inflammatory in nature. It's not going to rev up tumor and cancer cells. It's not going to raise cholesterol levels. It's not going to be harsh on the kidneys and the liver. So you have this Goldilocks type of protein in your barley, in your brown rice, in your sweet potatoes, in your black beans, your lentils, your strawberries. And there's protein in every whole plant-based foods, right? I mean, on the low end, you've got your average fruit that's 6.5% protein by calories. On the high end, you've got white mushrooms that are 57% protein, right?
Wow.
And then you got everything in between. Oatmeal, my oatmeal in the morning, oats are 16% protein. Beautiful. Okay, next, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not a four-letter word. Carbs are good. Now, I think you and I agree, refined carbohydrates are crappy, and 95% of America's carbohydrate consumption comes from crappy carbs.
Serious? 95%?
95%. The white sugar, the white rice, the white pasta,
versus
the
vegetables,
white bread,
fruits, and
right?
sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
95%.
Yeah, but most Americans. So I was talking earlier about that USDA thing.
Yeah.
About 55% is coming from processed refined foods. Another 35% is coming from meat and dairy. Only about 6% is coming from whole plant-based foods. Most Americans aren't eating whole plant-based foods. Okay, but carbohydrates. So whole unprocessed carbs are fantastic. We have roughly, Brad, 10 trillion cells that make up Brad Kearns and Rip Esselstyn and Joe, right? Joe, the firefighter I'm working with. 10 trillion. The fuel for those cells, right, it's sugar, it's carbohydrates, right? It's glycogen, it's glucose. And so it's important that we consume carbohydrates in their unprocessed form. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So you go on a keto paleo program, your numbers are going to look beautiful. You're going to say, "Oh my God, look what's happened to my insulin resistance, my fasting, or my blood sugar numbers in the morning are like rock solid." Of course they are. You're consuming like maybe 10-20% of your calories are coming from carbohydrates. So the true test of somebody that is insulin sensitive is, can you consume carbohydrates without it jacking up your blood sugar numbers? Because if you're not taking in carbs, of course everything's going to look pretty. But all of a sudden we do that glucose test and you're a mess. And the reason is because most Americans and most medical doctors don't know the true definition of what is diabetes. And the problem with type 2 diabetes, it's not a sugar problem, it's a fat problem. We have too much fat inside every one of those 10 trillion cells that represent Brad and Rip. And because you have too much fat in those cells, it doesn't allow the insulin to do its job, which is to escort sugar into the cells. You basically have gummed up, with all that fat, you have gummed up the insulin, the receptors on that cell, so it can no longer allow the insulin to do its job. And so you get this backlog of sugar in your system. This is why you look at people like
the cells are full of triglyceride. They've already overmaxed.
Yep.
That's what you're saying by backlog.
No,
and so
well,
the
no.
insulin's trying to.
When I say backlog, I'm talking about the sugar. So the sugar has no recourse but to basically build up, and now you're basically got these elevated cells are full.
And that's, I think, excess body fat is the indicator, or the accumulation of excess body fat, showing that you're overwhelming your system. Listen, if you have somebody that's 300, 400 pounds, right there, you're looking at somebody that is suffering from severe inflammation, too many calories, typically insulin resistance, all that stuff. But so you put somebody on a low fat, whole food, plant-based diet, and now they're consuming 10% or less of their calories from fat, and the predominant amount of their fat consumption is coming from like the polyunsaturated healthy fats that we need. In a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, they will go from being insulin resistant to insulin sensitive, meaning they can now tolerate carbohydrates and it won't jack with their blood sugar numbers. Eric Adams, who's running for mayor of New York City and has become a friend of mine. He's currently the head of the Brooklyn borough, which is over 3 million people, was suffering from like bad signs of type 2 diabetes, went to 3 different nephrologists in New York City, highly recommended. They all said the best thing he could do was manage his diabetes.
He watched Forks Over Knives, made an appointment with my father, flew to Cleveland and met with my father, started following the whole food, plant-based, low-fat. 3 months later, his A1C is down from 17 to 17, insanely high, right? To 5.3, lost 35 pounds, and he was losing his eyesight in his left eye. He had neuropathy in all of his limbs, his feet.
No morning erection.
I didn't ask him about that. But so, I mean, he was on the front of the New York Times, right? Because of this amazing transformation that he did. But I interviewed him for the podcast. And this is a man that has a refrigerator in his office. He's got an exercise bicycle machine in his office. He preps all of his food for the week on Sunday. He does soups. He does salads. He does, not lean, but he does whole intact grains. I mean, the guy is like living the lifestyle. It's amazing what he's doing. But so to me, and I'm sorry that was so long-winded, but you can do keto, you can do paleo, you can lose the weight, you can look great, right? But my bet is you are just managing your blood sugar levels in a kind of a way that's smoke and mirrors and artificial. If you were to actually have a couple bananas, oranges, blah, 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 your blood sugar numbers would probably spike dramatically because, again, you haven't addressed the root causation, which is that excessive fat that's in those cells. Even though you've lost weight, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've lost all that intracellular myolipids that are there.
Same with someone who's not overweight but can have signs of type 2 diabetes, skinny fat.
Yep.
They're just insulin resistant, even without the genetics don't have them store fat. Yeah. So the story we've known for a long time is straight up legit. Started with Pritikin, Dean Ornish, your dad's work, your work with Engine 2, the firefighters in Austin. Yeah. We didn't even talk about, you came into the station, saw these guys having Texas barbecue and overweight and health struggling and turned them into a plant-based station. That's kind of how you got your launch here. So I think that's it's very valid, and it's a restrictive diet that we want you to adhere to.
Now, wait, hold on. When you say restrictive, meaning who? Me, you? Who?
Right, coming from whatever our starting point, standard American diet. And Rip's telling me, don't eat any more fat. And I'm going to go 30 days later, and my blood work's going to get a lot better. That's absolutely undisputed.
But I'm not saying don't eat fat. What I am saying is let's not do the saturated fats you're going to get from meat, the trans fats that are lurking there in meat as well. Even though it's low levels, you have trans fats. And we're just going to get all of our fats from whole plant-based sources.
Right. So a very low-fat diet, I guess you would call it, compared to American diet, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's a good point, because you look at the American Heart Association, and their idea of a low-fat diet is 30% calories coming from fat, which we know.
Too many lobbyists, man. Which inching in there. What about dairy? Can we keep it in? Okay, sure.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. And you look at my father, Dean Ornish, Dr. Greger, McDougall, Joel Furman, and they're going to tell you, if you really want to reverse chronic Western disease, you got to get down below, ideally right around 10% of your calories from fat, which is a tad bit lower than what the keto people recommend.
I mean, if you're limiting protein and limiting fat, your satiety factor in your diet is going down. And are you seeing any difficulty with long-term adherence because of that? Also just the restriction of, hey, I grew up on all these delicious Texas barbecue things. I'm from Texas. My fellow firefighters tell me I can't have ribs anymore.
Yeah, but here's the thing. So, I've been doing this for 32 years now, right? I started in 87 when I graduated from UT. And
started winning the swims and triathlons around the world.
But it's all a matter of your attitude, right? I don't look at this as restrictive. I look at this as a eating style of abundance, of fulfillment. And I never push away from the breakfast table or the lunch or the dinner table going, oh my God, I'm starving or I don't feel satisfied. I'm eating the most amazing array of colorful fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and nuts and seeds that are on this planet. And my diet, I never get tired of it. I'm always excited come mealtime. So truly, to me, the diet that is restrictive is it's the standard American diet that is, what are we having? We're having steak, we're having chicken, we're having bacon and eggs, we're having pasta. It is the most boring, ridiculously, diet I can think of. And to boot, it's giving you all these chronic Western disease. It's making you obese, insulin resistance. You're setting the groundwork for cancers, heart disease. It's like, no, thank you. So I think America needs a huge wake up call what does it truly mean to eat healthy and eat in abundance to fulfillment, where you don't have to count calories, worry about portion control, weigh and measure your food, and do any of that nonsense. And it's not a scientific experiment. So, what lens are you looking through? And so these firefighters that I work with, going back to 2003, they embraced it too. We were doing, burritos as big as your face. We were doing, jalapeno, black bean, brown rice burgers with, caramelized onions and sauteed mushrooms. We would do pizza. We'd roll our own whole grain crusts, and we'd do a barbecue sauce, or we'd do a nice red sauce, or we'd do a spinach hummus, and we'd lay out, all the toppings: spinach, broccoli, black beans, pineapples, sun-dried tomatoes. The list goes on and on and on. And now we don't have the cheese on top, and so instead of eating 2 or 3 pieces, we're eating 4 or 5 or 6 pieces and getting the same amount of calories. So it's a beautiful lifestyle. And I tell anybody that's willing to think outside the proverbial box and not get sucked down another distracting path, look at the whole food plant-based lifestyle. It's got a lot to offer.
What do you say to the ancestral rationale that we evolved for 2.5 million years, getting these concentrated sources of dense nutritional food like animal products?
Well, I would say that we were gather-hunters, not hunter-gatherers, and that majority of people subsisted on roots and tubers and other things. And yeah, I'm sure we introduced, some animal products along the way, but
fish, especially marine life. And now there's also a pretty large population of, what do you call them, like the pescatarians or vegetarian, who's allowing in the eggs and the fish and things, right? They're making their own guidelines, but that's jumping a little bit from.
Yeah.
When you say plant-based, base means you're eating a lot of plants, but are you drawing the line at any animal product, or do you have some allowances in there?
Well, when I say whole food plant-based, no, listen, my prescription that I write about in my books is 100% plant-based. Mm-hmm. It's not 95, mm-hmm. It's not 90, it's not 80, it's 100%. I don't know what 95% looks like. I don't know what that means. And to me, the decision is black and white, and it's always easy when you're 100% all in. All of a sudden, man, it's like, do I feel like having that, that chicken breast tonight? I've been good for 6 days. No, all of a sudden, it's like, exactly, what you're eating, what you're not eating, and you're not going there. And, I tell people, Brad, the beautiful thing about eating this way is that you check every box. So you're checking the box as far as being the healthiest version of yourself. You're checking the box as far as, I want to be a good steward to this environment, to Mother Earth that is crying out right now for help. And I don't want to be eating animal products because they contribute anywhere between 18 to 51% of global greenhouse gas emissions between the life cycle and the supply chain of all these animals that we're growing and killing and then putting into the grocery stores. And then lastly, I don't want to be complicit in the killing of 70 billion animals worldwide. It's not in alignment with my values as being a kind and compassionate person. So, and the fact that we don't live, in 2019, none of us is worried about getting enough calories. None of us, it's not like, like
none
you
of
said.
Us listening.
Right. All we got to do is go to the nearest supermarket, and we're getting all we need. So,
How about Amazon, Whole Foods, Amazon Prime?
Amazon Prime, yeah.
2 hours to get some Whole Foods shopping.
Right there, right? You can get anything you want, including the Engine 2 products. But, so it checks every box, and I love that with every breakfast, lunch, and dinner that I eat Plant Strong, I'm putting that stake in the ground, and I'm standing for something.
S-T-A-K-E.
S-T-A-K-E. Very
You're
good.
putting the other steak in the garbage can. Putting the steak in the ground.
Yep. And that feels really good. And the ripple effect is profound and far-reaching. Yeah.
Well, I mean, away from the either or for a moment, when you write a book and you say, come 100% all in with me to this plant-based lifestyle, I think that itself is a really powerful angle to take. And I've talked about on recent podcasts where my commitment was slipping. I went into experimental mode and went full keto for 4 months and tested my blood every day and didn't eat any carbs. And then I transitioned to something else where I'm going to try to add back more of this and more of that. And then I was fasting until 1 p.m. And then I was eating a big green smoothie in the morning to get a bunch of calories so I could fuel my workouts. And after a while, if you start experimenting too much or letting too many concessions happen, you start to go down that slippery slope into habit where my evening popcorn binge to celebrate and have some fun and relax. I mean, that's not big in the keto scene, okay? I don't know about plant-based. That might be borderline. You might be okay with it a little bit, but it's sort of like you can go away from things that make you the best version of yourself, like you said. So I'm totally in with that. Go 100% all-in commitment. Whatever you decide is up to you. And if you want to throw in eggs, even though Rip suggests no eggs, but you're going to be a ovo-vegetarian, that's...
Well,
just do it. Do what you say you're going to do, which is where your real strength comes.
And
you can't get out of the room with Ripper.
And you mentioned
until you agree to modify your swim stroke according to his guidelines. That's
we have to talk about the feel. But the thing about eggs, the thing I like to say, there's only two things wrong with the egg: the yolk and the white. And I was looking at your Instagram posts lately, and I saw a lot of like, what are they called? Open-faced eggs. I can't even remember what they're called. But sunny side up. And the only two things that are wrong with the egg are the yolk and the white. The yolk has over 200 milligrams of cholesterol, which is more than 2 Burger King Whoppers with cheese. And the egg white, as I talked about earlier, is a source of pernicious animal protein that we really don't need.
Which means scrambled eggs are okay with Rip because those are neither white nor yolk. They're kind of in between. No, maybe not. Sorry. Maybe not so much.
But you know what? You were talking when you emailed me to ask me to do this. You said we talk about the feel.
We have to,
right? And we would definitely have to talk about the feel. Yeah. But I think along with talking about the feel, we also should talk a little bit about. So you wrote a book. You've written several books, but one of the things I loved about you is that you wrote that book where you were like in that engine of that airplane, and it's about you can make a living doing that,
it's about
right?
Triathlon career,
with triathlon careers. Yeah. But that was before I knew anybody that had written a book, and you were one of the first people. That was awesome. And then you wrote a litany of books, and you wrote, how does Lance do it? You wrote, how does Tiger do it?
Ripper and Lance go way back, people. I mean, Rip was basically Lance's inspiration for a long time to eat healthy and just turn those things straight.
I wouldn't go that far, but Lance and I've known Lance since he was 15, and we met at the Bermuda International Triathlon when he was kicking everybody's butts at the age of 15, right? And I tell people, Lance had such a big engine, and he was so amazing, and when he was one of the top triathletes in the world, he wasn't doping, right? He was doing it naturally because that was Lance Armstrong, and you and I both know Lance. I mean, you wrote a whole book on Lance, but Lance, he's got that mentality, and he does whatever it takes.
Just a quick summary of that whole controversy with Lance and his doping. If there were no doping in the Tour de France in those years, Lance would have, we know this to be true, so we're going to say it to the audience now. He would have won by 20 minutes instead of 2 minutes, or 17 minutes instead of 7 minutes, because he had all the athletic attributes.
Yep.
oh, all of a sudden everybody's doping, including him. He still wins. But I argue that those guys got closer to him because he was a genetic freak and an absolute master of psychological preparation.
Yep,
and
yep.
everything in his life was calibrated to be a champion.
Yep.
So it's kind of too bad that the sport wasn't clean for Lance, because it would have been a half an hour ahead, maybe.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
my contention.
No, Lance was spectacular. I mean, at the age of 17 and 18, he was beating up on Dave Scott, Mark Allen, you, me, Wes Hobson. I mean,
And thinking nothing of it.
No.
Speaking of peak performance mindset, he'd be like,
so
those guys are wusses. I'll kick their
No.
butt. A teenager.
But you're right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like most people, they wouldn't have the cojones to beat somebody like Dave Scott or Mark Allen, right? Or Scott Molina or Scott Tinley. But Lance thought nothing of it. He's like, well, why not?
Mhm.
I should be able to do that.
Yeah,
Crazy
back,
stuff.
something you said at the start of the show about overcoming your fears has been sort of your story, because you were a jock guy needing to go get a job, going into the fire department, but you're always looking and expanding your consciousness and what was possible, and then jumping to the next thing, becoming a best-selling author, jumping to the next thing. And you can't do that if you're locked in a little framework of, minimal possibilities, or you got someone ragging on you in the background. And your wife did this transformation school experience down here.
Right.
I called it the fake school for many years because I didn't believe something so incredible. It was called the KIPP. Is she still doing that? The KIPP school?
So she was the director. She started
Still getting a shout out. Now you have to. Now she has to listen for an hour.
Yeah.
Hey, honey, you're at the end of the podcast. Listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, no. Well, it's this amazing model. So it's a charter school called KIPP. And KIPP stands for Knowledge is Power Program. And she started it in 2002. By 2000 and probably 10, 11, 12, she had gone from just 22 fifth graders to now there's 9 different schools, over 5,000 different kids, K through 12. There's probably 3 different K through 5, 5 different 5 through 8, and 3 different high schools. It's one of the greatest success stories in the state of Texas when it comes to education. And these kids, they're typically underprivileged kids, but they're in school 60% more than their public school, counterparts. And their whole motto is, we work harder than anyone else, and we're climbing the mountain to college. And most of these kids, they're being raised either by a single mother or a single father or grandparents. And it's a really cool story. But Jill's now on the board of directors. She stepped away about 3 years ago.
Look it up. We'll find a link. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And then what's also incredible is going back into our triathlon days, and we believe that the way to get good and compete against these top guys from all over the world was to train your ass off to exhaustion every single day and try to get good at 3 sports. And then we're sitting around talking, and the life-changing insight came from Ripper about the feel.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, so the feel, I actually, and I don't know if you're specifically referring to the bike or the swim or the run.
Feet on top of the bare feet on top of the bike shoes.
Yeah.
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 But in general, especially the swim, because you're a swimmer guy.
Yeah. But what? Yeah. So the feel, to me, what Brad's referring to is, I went through a period of time there when I would actually take my bare feet, I'd jump from the swim onto my bike, and I would just bike with my feet on top of my bike shoes. I wouldn't put my feet inside or anything like that. And it's because, for whatever reason, I just had this better feel. I felt like I was feeling the whole stroke around the whole, pedal axis. It was this easy speed. And sometimes I couldn't climb quite as well because, when your
feet were not in shoes.
Feet weren't in the shoes. But I can remember I came off the bike at St. Croix International Triathlon in second place with my feet on top of the shoes right behind Pig. And I think that year I got 5th place or something like that. So it worked for me, right? But the larger picture is, and we probably all know of Malcolm Gladwell's book, about 10,000 hours to kind of really perfect something, become a master of it. I think you and I both probably trained for more than 10,000 hours, right? Big time, swimming, biking, and running. But I look now at the swim, the bike, the run, and how some days I feel like I could conquer the world. I could get the, Masters world record, right? And then other days I'm like, oh my God, I just don't have it today. And it's just peculiar to me on any given day why I have the feel and then why I don't. And I try and like capture it and write notes and what was I exactly doing. And it can be very elusive. And I'll point to Tiger Woods, right? I mean, you wrote all about Tiger, but here's Tiger. He's doing amazingly well. And yes, he had a string of injuries and other things, but you talk about a golfer, they just don't have it with the putting today, or their drive's off, or one of these tennis players like Novak Djokovic, who's now like number one in the world, but he had a bad 2 or 3 years there. It's like the feel. To me, the feel, it's this nebulous feel, but it's not just cycling, it's not just swimming. It's in every sport that's out there. It's in writing.
Absolutely.
It's in when we're doing this podcast right now, right? There's sometimes I'm doing the podcast and I'm like, man, I am like nailing it. I'm 100% present. I'm there. My questions, man, I feel great about it. And there's other times when it's like, I don't have the feel. I don't have the feel today. You know what I mean?
We got to draw it out of you.
Right.
That's a host job, man. Light this guy up.
It is. But so the feel, when you did your world record, right, on the speed golf course, and was it 2 minutes and 20 seconds?
A minute 38.
A minute
on
38.
Par 5.
Right. But you did it, was it the first or second try?
First try.
First try. What are the chances of you nailing it on the first try, but you had the feel?
With a birdie.
With a birdie.
With one club.
Sprinting
full speed.
500 yards.
Meter. Yeah. I mean, it was. I'm glad you brought that up.
Seriously.
There's a whole show about it if you want to go look it up. But that was one of the greatest athletic performances I've ever done in my life, because I came through under pressure, and it was magical in that sense that it wasn't just done from more hard work. Like we trained harder on the bike and we pedaled faster in the next race. And you brought up the writing and all that. And I strongly believe I have these reference points where I'm waiting for my fiance in the car in a parking lot. So there's no internet. And I whip out the laptop, and in an hour or whatever, knowing like I'm motivated, she's still working late into the night. It might have been later than we agreed to meet. And you just go to town and you get into this zone where it's effortless and things flow out of you because you're not trying as hard as usual. And it's so graphic on the swimming through water or pedaling a bike. But we would laugh. I laughed at you when you told me the first story. Like, what are you effing talking about, Rip? Put your shoes in the pedals. I saw you at the turnaround. You were ahead of me, so maybe I should have thought more. But like, why didn't you put your shoes in? He's like, you don't understand. If I have the feel. But the awakening that occurred, and that was many, many years ago. But I'm thinking about that when I go into writing mode, or if you're struggling and frustrated that something's not working because you're trying so hard, back a couple steps up. Let it flow like the Ripper.
Yeah.
Look for that feel.
That nebulous flow, man. The feel. I'll apply it to everything in life, all things in life, and
parenting. I mean, there's no rules for parenting, right? There's some, but you can get clogged up, and sometimes you got to feel your way through it, and you have different kids that respond differently. And that's my insight looking back. Like, man, there's no owner's manual where every day, what do you do here? You just got to feel it, man.
Well, that's a whole nother topic.
We'll do another podcast.
Raising kids.
Yeah.
And I've got 3. I've got a 5-year-old. I've got she just turned 10 a couple days ago. And then I've got an 11-year-old. And it is, we're right now in the throes of life. It is so rich. It is so intense. It is every day we got these amazing highs and lows and tantrums and laughing fits. And arguments and screaming and shouting, and the house is an absolute disaster zone. But man, we are living large.
It's full of love.
Yes,
that's Ripper's all about. Dude, thanks a lot. Fist bump off camera here. Lots to think about, and good luck with your show. What's the URL to go look at that podcast?
Well,
find it on.
You can. It's iTunes, it's Stitcher, Google Play, all platforms where you can find podcasts. And it's a Plant Strong podcast.
Thank you for listening to the show. We would love your feedback at getoveryourselfpodcast@gmail.com. And we would also love if you could leave a rating and a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. I know it's a hassle. You have to go to desktop iTunes, click on the tab that says ratings and reviews, and then click to rate the show anywhere from 5 to 5 stars. And it really helps spread the word so more people can find the show and get over themselves because they need to. Thanks for doing it. Okay, if you're ready to change your life, please check out the Primal Blueprint Mastery courses, of which I am the host. The exercise was to bring our books to life with a comprehensive online multimedia educational experience. We have the Primal Blueprint 21-day transformation, so you can go primal, ditch grains and sugars, learn what primal living is all about. We have the Keto Reset Mastery course. If you've built up some good momentum and now you're ready to try this keto thing and do it right once and for all and be guided step by step throughout the content in the entire book, The Keto Reset Diet, through video. If you're too lazy to read, just watch me talk you through the whole thing. We also have the Primal Endurance Mastery course, which is the world's most comprehensive library of interviews with experts, great athletes, and covering the entire content of the Primal Endurance book. An absolute must-have for an endurance athlete who's trying to do it right instead of get broken down and burnt out. And many other ones. We have a stand-up desk experience called Don't Just Sit There with Katie Bowman. We have a paleo cooking boot camp where you can cook for a couple hours on the weekend and have meals for your family all throughout the week. Great courses. Click the links at bradkearns.com and learn more.